The night sky above northern Italy was streaked with moonlight and tracer fire. August 12, 1943, another perilous raid on Turin. The great black shape of a Sterling bomber, heavy with bombs and fuel, droned through the high thin air, its engines laboring against the weight of altitude and flak. In the cockpit sat Flight Sergeant Arthur Lewis Aaron, 21 years old, calm and steady, hands on the controls, eyes fixed on the distant glow of the city below. The crew of 7 trusted him completely. He had earned that trust, quiet, methodical, and unflinching in the face of danger. Tonight's mission was simple on paper: bomb the industrial heart of Turin and bring the aircraft home. But no night over enemy territory was ever simple. As the Sterling began its bombing run, the sky suddenly erupted in chaos. Out of the darkness, a German night fighter sliced in, guns blazing. The bomber shuddered under the impact. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and flames licked along the fuselage. 3 engines were hit. The front and rear turrets went silent, useless. A burst tore through the cockpit. The navigator slumped forward, dead before he could cry out. Aaron felt the world explode around him. A bullet smashed through the canopy and struck him in the face. His jaw shattered, a portion of his cheek torn away. Another bullet ripped through his chest, collapsing a lung. His right arm fell limp, useless. The Sterling lurched into a screaming dive, plummeting thousands of feet toward the dark earth. Blood blurred Aaron's vision as he tried to pull back the controls, but he could not. His strength failed him. The flight engineer, acting on instinct, seized the yoke and somehow leveled the bomber at barely 3,000 feet above the ground. The aircraft was a ruin. 1 engine dead, the others coughing and trembling. The fuselage riddled with holes. The cockpit glass was gone, the wind howling through, and amid it all, their captain, barely conscious, unable to speak, his face a ruin of blood and agony, refused to surrender. Aaron gestured desperately toward the bomb aimer, scribbling directions on a notepad with his left hand. He could not form words, but his meaning was clear. "Take the controls. Set course south. We're going home." The Sterling limped through the blackness, heading for the faint promise of safety across the Mediterranean. The crew, stunned and bleeding, worked with grim determination. They treated Aaron as best they could, giving him morphia, binding his wounds. They begged him to rest. He did, for a time, but duty gnawed at him like a fire that refused to die. Hours later, as the bomber droned on, he stirred again. His eyes opened. He motioned to be lifted back into the pilot's seat. "Let me fly," he wrote shakily on a scrap of paper. They tried to protest. He could barely breathe, could hardly move, but he insisted. They helped him into the seat, placing his feet on the rudder pedals. He gripped the controls with his one good hand, blood running down his sleeve, and fought to keep the crippled aircraft steady. Twice, he tried to fly. Twice he nearly blacked out from pain and blood loss. Each time his men eased him back, afraid that the effort alone would kill him. Still, he guided them with gestures and scrawled notes, helping the bomb aimer keep the plane level, plotting the course home in silence and suffering. 5 endless hours passed. Over the Mediterranean, the fuel gauges began to drop. The crew exchanged glances. If they couldn't find a landing strip soon, they would have to ditch in the sea. But then, through the dark, they saw it, the faint gleam of flares marking Bone Airfield in Allied-held North Africa. Salvation flickered in the distance. Aaron stirred once more. He could barely lift his head, but he summoned the last of his strength. His eyes burned with the same unbreakable determination that had carried them this far. He gestured, 5 fingers, 5 approaches if we must. The bomb aimer guided the battered Sterling down, the undercarriage too damaged to lower. 4 times they came in, circling, struggling against the dead engines and the unresponsive controls. Each time, Aaron directed the attempt, tracing notes with his trembling hand, forcing himself to stay conscious. On the 5th, his strength finally broke. The crew restrained him gently as he slumped in his seat. The bomb aimer took over, guided by Aaron's last written instructions, and brought the bomber in belly first. It skidded across the airfield, sparks flying, but it landed. Against every odd, they were home. 9 hours later, Flight Sergeant Arthur Lewis Aaron died of his wounds. His body had given out, but his spirit had carried his crew to safety. In that shattered aircraft, over those endless hours, He had shown the truest measure of courage, not in the fire of attack, but in the long agony of endurance. He could have let go. He could have lain still and lived. Instead, he chose to lead, to fight, and to save his men, even at the cost of his life. His name would live forever among those who gave everything in the service of others, a quiet young pilot who refused to die until his crew was safe, his courage shining as bright as the dawn that rose over Bone Airfield that morning. The dawn broke pale and uncertain over the hills north of Imphal. The jungle mist hung low, drifting like ghostly smoke through the gullies, clinging to the bare slopes. From somewhere beyond the haze came the dull crack of rifle fire. The Japanese were there, dug into the ridgeline above, holding the ground that overlooked the British and Indian positions below. It was April 6, 1944, and the battle for Imphal was tightening like a noose. A patrol had gone forward at first light and returned shaken. The enemy was well entrenched, perhaps 40 strong, armed with machine guns and grenades. They had taken the feature in the night and now commanded the heights. To retake it would be to climb into the teeth of their guns. The order came down just after sunrise. The task would fall to Jemadar Abdul Hafiz, a young officer of the 9th Jat Regiment, tall, fierce-eyed, his bearing that of a man both disciplined and deeply devout. He had 2 sections under his command, barely 20 men. The slope before them was open ground, no trees, no boulders, only the red-brown earth and the rising heat. The Japanese waited above, unseen but certain. Abdul Hafiz gathered his men at the base of the hill. His voice carried with quiet conviction, calm yet burning with belief. "We are invincible," he told them. "The enemy will die on this hill, or they will flee before us." There was no fear in him, only certainty. The kind of certainty that reaches inside men's hearts and steels them for the impossible. At 0930, the guns opened. British artillery thundered in the distance, the shells bursting over the ridge in great blossoms of earth and smoke. When the last echo rolled away, Abdul Hafiz raised his arm and began to climb. The slope was cruel, steep, bare, exposed to every eye and every gun. The sun was already fierce, the air filled with the crack of Japanese rifles, the chopping of machine guns. Bullets kicked dust at their feet. Men began to fall, rolling back down the slope. Still they climbed. Abdul Hafiz led from the front, his voice rising in the old Mohammedan battle cry, ringing across the hillside, a cry of faith, of fury, of defiance. A few yards from the crest, the enemy's fire redoubled. Grenades came tumbling down, bursting in clouds of dirt and flame. Men screamed. Abdul Hafiz's leg was struck. The shock nearly threw him down, but he would not stop. He saw a Japanese machine gun on the flank, its muzzle spitting death. Without hesitation, he limped forward, closing the distance. As the gun swung toward him, he seized the barrel with his bare hand, forcing it upward. The gunner fell an instant later, cut down by one of Hafiz's men. Breathing hard, blood running down his leg, Abdul Hafiz stooped and lifted a Bren gun from a wounded soldier. With his good leg braced against the slope, he began to fire. The gun roared and chattered, sweeping the crest. Enemy soldiers fell. The rest began to break. He advanced, firing from the hip, shouting for his men to follow. The ridge erupted into chaos as the Japanese fled down the far side, leaving their dead and their weapons behind. For a moment, victory seemed complete. But from another ridge, a few hundred yards away, a new machine gun opened up, its fire raking across the hilltop. Abdul Hafiz turned, saw his men reforming, and shouted for them to hold the position. He pressed forward again, still firing, still pursuing the retreating enemy. Then the bullets found him. One struck deep in the chest. He stumbled, fell to his knees, the Bren gun still clutched in his hands. Even as his strength ebbed, he tried to lift the gun again, to fire one last burst. "Reorganize on the position," he called, his voice hoarse with blood. "I will give covering fire." He never rose again. When his men reached him moments later, he was gone, but his words, his courage, still carried them forward. They secured the hill, killing or driving off the last defenders. By the time the smoke cleared, 13 enemy dead lay in front of their position, and the spoils of battle, machine guns, grenade dischargers, officers' swords, lay scattered across the crest. The slope that had seemed impossible was theirs. The men who had followed him, still trembling from exhaustion and grief, knew they had witnessed something sacred, the kind of courage that no bullet could destroy. Jemadar Abdul Hafiz was 25 years old. In the space of an hour, he had inspired ordinary men to greatness, turned fear into fire, and seized victory from the jaws of death. His name would be remembered not only as a soldier's, but as a leader whose faith and fearlessness transformed a hopeless assault into a triumph. Which of these stories inspired you the most? Let me know your thoughts in a comment. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.